Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third webinar in the Building People second series of EDI Briefings. This series is all about diversity, different dimensions and shared elements of experience, and sponsored by Planning Portal. Now, it's very important to frame these sessions as part of the knowledge gathering that you might have as you try to improve how you work and relate effectively across difference. But there really are two very important things to remember. Representation matters, but not everyone from a particular group is the same. And there's a lot of diversity within any described group. Also, inclusion. It isn't about other people and their identities or characteristics or culture. It's about us and our behaviors. How do we respect? How do we value? How do we support difference? However, someone might identify. So I'll be providing some insight and guidance around that too. But for now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a couple of our panelists. Hannah Brooke from Renaisi and Jess Littlewood from Public Practice. I'm Marsha Ramrup and I'm the Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Executive Director for Building People, and we'll be looking after you over the next 45 minutes or so as we discuss these matters. Hopeful that Neighbour can join us in a bit. I'm just going to stop the share for now and allow our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves and to tell us a little bit about their organisation. If I can start with Jess.
Thank you so much, Marsha. And hello, everyone. Really excited to be with you here today. So my name is Jess Littlewood and I'm the Programmes Manager at Public Practice. A quick introduction to Public Practice for those of you that may not know. We recruit motivated and experienced placemaking professionals who want to gain experience working in the public sector organisations. So since 2018, we've recruited 320 associates at 87 authorities across England. Alongside their placement year that they do in the public sector organisation, the associates also gain valuable knowledge from our learning development course and also join a cohort of like-minded individuals as well. The main aspects of my role include running the associate programme recruitment process, supporting on the monitoring and evaluation of our work. So that's the perspective that I will be speaking from today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. And Hannah.
Thank you, Marsha. Yeah, super excited to be here too. So I am the Head of Partnerships at Renaisi, and we're proudly a social enterprise, so not limited by charitable objects, and we really exist just to create positive change, positive social impact, and partner and collaborate to that effect. So we have a kind of unique model which brings together a social sector consultancy with service delivery and in-depth support around kind of place-based and systems change, which really helps us to understand the complexity of lots of those social problems that show up in those spaces, and how we can actually challenge the root causes to tackle social and economic exclusion so we can strengthen communities across the UK. So that's our mission. And a large part of my role is about educating and enabling organisations and employers in particular to tackle socio-economic exclusion through transitions, which is our inclusive recruitment service, which restarts the careers of refugee professionals by preparing them for work and connecting them to our employer partners and supporting them to thrive.
Thank you. Thanks both very much indeed. Really important work that you both do in trying to address issues of race, ethnicity, religion, as they might face barriers, stereotypes, bias in various procedures, which has resulted in the underrepresentation of these groups in our built environment sector. So what's your, if I can start with you, Hannah, what's your approach to managing these issues around race, ethnicity and religion? How do you tackle them when faced with them in your work and try to bring about some kind of difference?
So I think we do it on two levels. So at that systemic level, as I said, we're educating and working side by side with those employers to really dismantle those structural barriers that result in refugees being screened out of, a recruitment process and end up facing long-term unemployment or underemployment, flipping burgers, driving Ubers, all valuable jobs, but not when you're an engineer or a doctor and could be saving lives and solving our world's problems. So that's really kind of like focusing at that level and thinking about, and again, I know we're going to go on to talk about that a little bit later, but around kind of what's holding that in place, those systemic, inequalities in terms of bias, and how can we address those. But we're also working at kind of personal level, obviously, with our candidates. We provide person-centered support. So we're not only helping them to kind of navigate rebuilding their lives in a new country, but actually navigate, and this bit always breaks my heart, with the systemic harm that they experience on arrival in the UK. So, not only have they fled trauma and a variety of different reasons why they've left their home country, they experience further harm on arrival in the UK in a variety of different ways. So, we provide trauma-informed support and career coaching to kind of rebuild their confidence and really help them, understand their employment rights, for example. Some real tactical things, but there's some real confidence building relational work that we do with those individuals to not only get them to the point where they can access work, but actually thrive in those roles. I don't know whether you want me to go on to talk about an example where we support people once they're in work, but I can do.
Well, we can come on to that, and certainly I know that Jess and public practice work alongside in a similar way to try to break down those systemic barriers. Jess, can you outline your approach at public practice to managing those issues around race, ethnicity, and religion? And certainly, can you describe the different approach that you take? Because you don't necessarily specifically set out to, if you like, discriminate against people who are not from underrepresented groups, but public practice take a very particular view to actually encouraging racialized groups and underrepresented groups to use public practice associate program and apply for it.
Yeah, of course. So looking at the first point, the first part of your question, I guess, if we look at what the issue is from a recruitment perspective, this will be very similar to what Hannah experiences, especially through the transition program as well. But it is that risk of discrimination that then goes on to impact lack of representation within the built environment. So looking at it from the mass hire recruitment perspective, it is issues that come about with people's unconscious bias affecting their decision making. We all have unconscious bias. They are there for us to be able to navigate this really complicated world that we live in. But in terms of when it relates to race, ethnicity, religion, gender, education, professional background, and so on, if discrimination does then occur, then it can have a really negative impact on those that are then hired. So our approach to managing this issue is through delivering an inclusive recruitment process. And we try and remove as much bias from our process as we can do. There's some really kind of clear, simple steps that we do to do this. I'll try to avoid going into too much detail, but I could speak about this for ages. So anonymized first stage application, we have structured interviews. Some of this, to some of your organizations, you will already be doing all of this. Maybe it might be a bit new for some of those that are listening, but standardized interview questions based on the skills, abilities and attributes as opposed to people's backgrounds, having that strict and clear marking criteria so that everyone is marking against the same scores, having multiple assessors, so harnessing that crowd wisdom to ensure that we get an objective score at the end, and of course having a range of adjustments throughout our process and onto our program as well. That's kind of the recruitment side of it. There's also a load that we do in terms of the data that we collect, but I know that we'll come on to that later. In terms of how we use our marketing and campaigning methods to try and reach more underrepresented groups. We work with different partners. So we work with Hannah's organisation as well, provide one-to-one support with some of the people that come through the transition programme. And we use our data to see where we are not reaching certain groups of people, and then we'll work with partners and reach out to them to try and attract more candidates from those networks as well.
So I've noticed that neither of you have used the term BAME. So can you explain to me a little bit about your decision not to use that term? And I will, of course, go into a little bit more detail as to the background to that. But tell me about your relationship with the term BAME, Jess.
Yeah. Of course, so we actually used to use the term BAME, and I'm sure everyone is aware of what the term BAME is, but just to try and reduce using acronyms on the meeting. So that's Black, Asian, minority, ethnic backgrounds. And we used to use this term when presenting our data. We have stopped using this term because it's not great to group people from very diverse ethnic backgrounds into one singular group. Does not reflect the differences of people within those groups at all. We now use, in terms of our, do you want me to go on?
Yes, please do. Yeah.
So in terms of us collecting data, we have a list of over 21 options when it comes to ethnicity. We measure our data not against how the sectors, so architecture, built environment sectors are performing, but against the regions that people are working in. And to do that, we need to measure against the ONS Office of National Statistics data, which has a list of 21 ethnicities and groups. There are umbrella groups within it, but we think it's really important to list all 21. And we've actually added 2 extras that aren't included in that. So that's Latinx or Hispanic and Arab as well. In our data, we also allow anyone to not provide information. So you can say prefer not to say, and we have prefer to just self-describe as well, so that people can describe and identify as they want, because even 21 is such a limited list and does not even begin to kind of cover all people's ethnicities or their identity to do with their ethnicities.
Hannah, what's your relationship? What's Renaisi's relationship with the term BAME?
Yeah, I recognise everything that Jess said. You know, it's about really just understanding, like, that was a term that came out, people used it, you know, then there was a discussion, and it's about listening and understanding and realising that doesn't do, for the reasons that Jess described, justice to suit so many different people in so many different ways. So we use, you know, we do need, when I'm sort of talking at events and I'm talking to people, an umbrella term. So I kind of tend to talk about underrepresented talent, because that's, you know, covers everybody that's underrepresented in this space. So we use that term. I'm very happy with that. Take any challenges if anyone has an issue with that, you know, and that's an open discussion. Or we talk about people seeking sanctuary, because again, people identify differently. Some people identify as a refugee, some people don't, you know, they come through a resettlement process. And so we use the, again, the term sanctuary seeker, but we will always be led by the individuals and how they want to self-describe.
Yes, so the term BAME originated from the civil service, and the purpose of it, of course, was to group together all people who weren't white. And there are various reasons for needing to do this, which all trace back to that systemic discrimination and systemic racism that can occur in our systems, and the othering of those who don't share that perspective of coming from a white background. And the use of the term BAME, it has been part of the systemic problem, and that's kind of one of the reasons why we'd advocate for people stopping using it. And changing language is one of the tools of inclusion. So what BAME does is it hides racial diversity when disaggregation can be very important, because you know, Black refers to skin color, Asian refers to a whole continent of 48 different countries that vary, like according to UN, from China and India through to the Maldives and the Yemen. So all very different people. You know, China and Japan and Korea, you know, you might describe those as East Asian heritage, for example. So when you're looking at issues of race, ethnic background, it's really important to understand why is it that you might refer to race. And from a data collection point of view, it's very important because you can start to understand where there might be gaps, because there's huge diversity within diversity when we're talking about race and ethnic background. And of course, people who are white also have an ethnic background. So if you're talking about ethnic minority, or you talk about ethnic and you mean a minority group, just bear in mind that you shouldn't be separating the word minority from the word ethnic in that respect. People have different views on being called brown, for example. I'm very comfortable being called a brown woman, but there may be other people who have the same skin color as me or similar who don't feel that way. So be really mindful that different people have different experiences with being associated with their racial background. And so it's really important to be clear why you're referring to race. What is the purpose of it? What are you trying to achieve with that? And so any opportunity to talk about those of different backgrounds, be aware of actually when we start to do that, what we're trying to do is frame things around systemic issues, and therefore systemic racism, and therefore be really conscious of what we're really doing when we're grouping people together is we're grouping together the people who experience racism. Now, Marcus Ryder, who you may or may not be aware of, came up with the acronym POWER, people who experience racism, but that was a joke. That was always a way to sort of draw attention to the fact that, you know, when you group people together in these ways, that it can be you know, a ridiculousness to have such a massive global majority, by the way, of people who aren't white described in one way. And so don't ever try to acronize these terms, if acronize is even a word. And so to both Jess and to Hannah's point, being clear as to what is the reason for trying to describe people using race, why you're gathering that data, what you're trying to achieve by doing so, being really clear and specific and targeted in how you do it is really, really important. And just, you know, when we're talking about race, it can be very difficult, and that's partly because it's been socialized to be. When you trace back the origins of race, race is of course a completely made up ideological concept. It is not rooted in biology at all. The Human Genome Project has described that as a human race, all of us together, there is only variations in 0.1% of our genomes. We are just one species on this planet. There are many species, subspecies of birds, bees, bacteria, even cats. But humans are one very homogenous species, but we're hardwired through our bias, to Jess's point, to recognize and see difference where it exists, and that has caused us a lot of problems. We've created these biases in ourselves and in our systems, which of course both Hannah and Jess are trying to navigate with their systems around inclusion, and as a result it's created this great difficulty. And just to quote from this book Biased by Jennifer Ebhart, she says that research shows us that talking about racial issues with people of other races is particularly stressful for white people, who may feel they have to work harder to sidestep minefields. Their physical signs of distress are measurable. Heart rates go up, blood vessels constrict, their bodies respond as if preparing for a threat. They demonstrate signs of cognitive depletion, struggling with simple things like word recognition tasks. Now, the point that I want to make about raising that is that we are therefore all victims of the system of racism, which seeks to create this this difference where we are biased towards people of different backgrounds. And so being able to have the methodologies, the strategies in order to mitigate it is really, really important. And it's through things like recruitment that people can face what are called microaggressions, but there's nothing micro about them. It's the repeated ways, small snubs and experiences which can be brought about as a result of the experience of simply having a different color skin. So really being aware of this and being able to navigate it is very, very important. So to come back to our guests and the way that you try to navigate these issues, Jess, can you just build on the point that you were making a little bit earlier about some of the systems change that you bring about?
Yeah, so in terms of thinking about perceptions or myths and perceptions of, say, architects or built environment professionals, there are biases out there about how those professions might look or might sound. And we want to challenge those biases and ensure that the built environment professionals are as diverse as the communities that they're representing as well. We wanted to tackle the perceived barriers to entry and progression and get better representation across ethnicity and religion, as well as professional backgrounds and alternative entry routes into the built environment public sector specifically. And one way that we do this is through our marketing campaign as well, which I lightly touched on. I'll only lightly touch on because it's not my work specifically. But we like to increase the representation of built environment professionals from different backgrounds by celebrating the work that our associates do, celebrating them. Also, they're within a team as well, so celebrating the team's achievements as well on our online platforms. We do this through our recruitment campaigns and we proactively feature certain associates from different backgrounds. This might be geographical backgrounds, so we've recently gone national. It might be lived experience. It might be also professional backgrounds to try and encourage that diversity of candidates to apply. This is also trying to change that perception of not only who can go into the public sector, but also change the perception or challenge the perception of what type of career opportunities are available within the public sector and what skills might be needed for those roles as well.
Thank you, Jess. And Hannah, in terms of the myths that you try to tackle at a systemic level, what are some of those that you face, especially with refugees and asylum seekers? You're unmuted, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, not so sure where to start. I was going to say there's so many, right? And one of the biggest perpetrators of those myths about refugees has just lost her job, but I still got the feeling that we've got our work cut out for us. So, here are some of the kind of the most base myths, we hear, and it kind of permeates people's mindsets, within large employers. So it's kind of like a public stroke everyone perception. So refugees aren't refugees, they're economic migrants, that they target Britain to access the welfare state, taking our jobs. If we just take those three, I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but not economic migrants at all. They're fleeing conflict, persecution, and in many cases left behind all their loved ones with only the clothes on their back. They're not targeting Britain because of the welfare state. They come here because there's a connection. For example, their countries were colonized by the British Empire. They speak English brilliantly, I might add, or they've got family here. So there's a connection here. And if you think about, asylum seekers that live on less than £5 a day, they're not able to work whilst they're waiting for their permission or right to work to be granted, and live in, frankly, horrendous temporary accommodation whilst they're waiting for that to go through, which obviously has an impact on mental health. So that's the reality. And they're not taking our jobs, because the UK vacancies are really still at a historic high. We've got a growing skills gap due to arguably chronic underinvestment over a long period of time. And so refugees really offer UK employers this untapped talent pool where they've got skills, transferable skills. And the candidates that I've had the privilege to work with, they're skilled, they're multilingual, some of the most resilient, hardworking people I know, definitely don't want to live on handouts, want to have wonderful careers, rebuild their lives and give back to the UK as a host society.
Thank you. And I like to share around that. So I'm always one for a quote. If you don't know this about me, you don't know me at all. I've always got a quote from a book or someone who can articulate things far better than I can alongside our panelists. And Matthew Syed, in his book Rebel Ideas, says a study published in December 2017 revealed that 43% of companies in the Fortune 500 were founded or co-founded by immigrants or children of immigrants, rising to 57% in the top 35 companies. And these companies produced $5.3 trillion in global revenue and employed 12.1 million workers worldwide in everything from tech to retail and finance to insurance. And this isn't an isolated finding. Immigrants make disproportionate contributions to technology, to patent production, and to academic science. And that a 2016 papers in the Journal of Economic Perspectives showed that US-based researchers had been awarded 65% of Nobel Prizes over the preceding few decades. Who were those innovators? More than half were born abroad. And it goes on to explain why immigrants who, for a variety of reasons, have a different way of doing things. They don't see things as immutable or irrevocable. It's something that can be changed because they have their own personal life experience, which is one of change, movement, adaptation. And so that's the point that Matthew Syed makes. And I'm glad you also brought up our former Home Secretary, because this is a really, really important point that I wish to make about representation and race. That the former UK Home Secretary, and myself, Suella Braverman, we went to the same school. Suella is about 4 years younger than me. I was the first head girl who was brown or black in that school. I was one of her head girls, in fact, and she followed a few years later to hold that role. We had the same teachers, we had the same head teacher, we had the same sorts of people around us. My peers had siblings in her year. Both our respective parents were immigrants to the UK. They both worked hard to put us through the private school that we went to. And yet you cannot have a person whose values and approach to life appear to be so very different from my own. If you were to put us side by side, however, I think we're similar height. We're both brown women. We both have shoulder length black hair. We're similar age, went to the same school, held the same position in that school, and you can look at us on paper and say, gosh, these people are very like, but that's not how I see us at all. As you know, she has recently been fired from her role for the views that she held and the way that she expressed those. And so I certainly don't subscribe to the validity of her policy approach in dealing with humans and human rights issues. So it's really, really important when we're thinking about inclusivity and we're thinking about how to manage underrepresentation, certainly racial underrepresentation, just because we're bringing in people to work with us that might address elements of that underrepresentation, which is important, it doesn't necessarily mean that those people themselves are inclusive or they have inclusive behaviors. Just because someone comes from an underrepresented group does not mean that they represent all of that group. or that they themselves have inclusive behaviors. So it's really very important when we're talking about race, when we're talking about, I mean, religion. We're currently in Islamophobia Awareness Month. It's Interfaith Week this week as well, that we talk about these things with honesty and openness, and be recognizing that even oh, it was a reshuffle at the moment. Things may have changed, but certainly the representation of racial diversity in the current government cabinet may or may not arguably reflect any kind of inclusive approach. So bear that in mind as well. Representation is important because we need to get that right. Representation should reflect the societal context, the population context in which we're working, and the impact on our built environment. However, representation plus inclusion has got to be the way forward. So thinking about these things as well going forward, what are some of the ways in which we can better support those discriminated against groups? Hannah, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of sounding a little bit like a broken record, it's about addressing those structural barriers, right, in employers' recruitment systems, because they're just banging on closed doors otherwise. So, Jess described the way that we work in partnership, so organizations and employers, I can say, go and find a partner, that has expertise working with the group, partner with them to understand what their needs are, how you can support access, but also them thriving in your organization. Because, AI, we talked about the fact that those barriers are essentially born of bias, and that is perpetuated by AI. But the root cause is us, so we really need to start with ourselves, our biases, our lack of awareness, really understand why are we being resistant to change? What is it we don't want to do differently that would actually be more inclusive and, arguably, according to McKinsey and many others, end up in us outperforming companies or continue to exist where other companies don't, right? So starting from that basis of educating recruiters and hiring managers, the key things that we come up against are that they need to understand what refugee status means. Often they sort of work out from a CV, or it's written plainly on a CV, and think, oh, that person's displaced. I'm going to have to pay for them to come from overseas, like an international, hire. I'm going to have to pay for their visa. And that's just not the case. If someone's got refugee status, that means they're already resident in the UK with a national insurance number, with right to work, and good to go. That's usually the key one that we try and break down. There's also that point I made earlier around transferable skills. So that transcends the need for what we see countless times on job descriptions. So if anyone's on the call, please go back and look for this. But UK work experience essential. Is it? Because when we've had constructive conversations with employers, invariably not. Most people have transferable skills, and if there's anything that's required to be upskilled, you can do that through targeted upskilling, around the local context. And then, so we, as Renaisi as an organisation and transitions, we actually follow our candidates into work. It's really important for us to be able to support both the employer and those individuals over 6 months of the kind of probationary period. And usually that just is sort of check-ins and involves potentially ironing out a few cultural miscoms which can arise. But we have had instances, and you mentioned it before, and I'm not great on the term and would love something else, but where individuals, it was quite early with me starting with transitions, went into an organisation, and very quickly through our conversations with him, we understood that he was experiencing multiple microaggressions, and this is obviously impacting him quite severely. And it was constantly having his English remarked on, that he was surprisingly good. And this isn't just unique to refugees. I mean, I understand that this happens to colleagues of black and brown colour that have lived here forever, that are, British to the core, etc. So, so having that English remarked upon, he found that really offensive. And repeatedly being called the wrong name in meetings, emails being sent to someone else with his surname as a first name. It just happened time over time, and that individual, we'd worked really hard and it was a great role, and on paper everything looks amazing, but actually we had to kind of take action and support him through that, reach out to their HR BP. He eventually moved on to another organisation. He's absolutely thriving in his new employer, and we're no longer working with that company. But it's so important that it's not just about access, it's about supporting individuals to thrive, and that's all about culture.
Thank you, Jess. I'm sure you have something to add to that as well, in terms of when you're placing in with your associates, the kind of culture that they might go into.
Yeah, very much echo what Hannah was saying as well, in terms of sharing that best practice for inclusive hiring and leading by example there. And as I said earlier, I'm sure some people on this call, their organizations are already doing way better than we are, and some may not be. It'll surprise me sometimes when people talk about their organization's hiring practices and just how uninclusive they are. And so even if at the very base level assessors come and help us assess at our assessment days, for example, and they take back anonymized applications or CVs. So there's so much research out there about names on CVs and the impact that has in changing a name, and the discrimination that people receive there. Or if it's just about setting out that clear and set marking criteria, it's not a last minute, oh, we really quickly need to recruit, let's interview this person, let's make up some questions and then see how we feel about them at the end. They are very easy things that people can bring back into their own organization. And it's also that shared learning, having spaces like this where we can talk, where we can be challenged, where we can challenge each other, and share our learnings and not be embarrassed as well, where we do have failings. In terms of the data stuff as well, we're really proud to be transparent with our data. So we shared that all on our website in terms of what the makeup of our cohorts look like in terms of in comparison to the regions where they work. So things there on collecting good quality data. You kind of mentioned it a bit before, Marsha, as well, but having a purpose for why you're collecting data. Don't just collect personal data from people just for the point of collecting it. It's a privilege to be able to have access to that data and make sure that you have a purpose for it, and that you do respect it and obviously store it in the correct way and use it properly. So yeah, share your data, as long as your sample size isn't so small that you're able to easily identify someone and put them at risk, obviously. But being consistent with that, being open to the learnings and the challenges. Where we place across the whole of England. So we have a huge range of people from their own personal backgrounds, then going into different organizations across the country, where there is a huge difference in terms of how much budget or spending people have access to, how much support people have. For some of our people being placed, they will be the only person that is working within their role. They won't necessarily have a team to support. So it's us being able to be there to support those people. Their cohort as well is often rated one of the biggest kind of support that people receive through the associate program. One of the biggest sales as well is that associates are able to join a cohort that are all transitioning mostly from private sector into the public sector at the same time, and able to lean on each other for that support too.
Thank you. And I think to reference, having that supportive culture and what that can feel like when it's not supportive, when going into particular places, to talk a little bit about microaggressions or micro incivilities. If you're not aware of the term, this is a low intensity act, if you like, which I mean, Dr. Binala Kandala describes them as violating the norms of respectful behaviours whose intent to harm is ambiguous. And they can be things like Hannah described, subtle slights and snubs that devalue people. So it might be that, that frequent mispronouncing of the name, or calling two people of similar heritage the same name, or planning nights out in pubs when you've got people who don't drink as part of your your workforce, or talking over people in meetings, for example. And some days you know, if you're, especially from a racialized background, you can brush these things off, but other days the same act can have a really devastating impact. And so it's really very important to be aware not only of these things that they can happen, but when they're raised, to acknowledge and listen and learn and reflect on those behaviors, and do things differently in future in order to try to avoid them. And then just quickly on the fact that we are in Islamophobia Awareness Month, and we are talking also about people of different religious backgrounds who may overtly display the fact they're from a religious background, facing very similar kinds of experiences and discrimination. So those from those who are Muslim, those who are Jewish, at this time facing different kinds of backlash. It's really important to listen and learn and support around those experiences, and be there, just simply be there to support those particular backgrounds, being aware that people can face discrimination at different times as a result of the wider context in which we're living and political narratives that might be circulating. A bit of research that I did around the term anti-Semitism, and that in workplaces, that it's people may be Jewish culturally, but may not practice Judaism as fully or as much as necessarily other people, but they still subscribe to the cultural name of being Jewish, and therefore can face anti-Semitism in the same way. And then, of course, those who cover their heads or wear a hijab or openly display that they are Muslim may well be facing various backlashes as well. And so this is really important to, as people who are in the workplace and have people amongst their number who may or may not openly declare that they practice a particular faith, to be aware of who is in your workplace and think about what their needs might be supportive and demonstrably supportive of having inclusive workplaces where people can feel comfortable, but also when there is this wider narrative going on, it may well be affecting how they might be at work, how much they can show up. And so being a supportive and inclusive workplace is not just about, talking about Black History Month or saying that you're cognizant that it was Diwali at the weekend. There's something very specific about how do we support our workplaces when political narratives are playing out in a particular way, and being able to facilitate conversations that are safe and meaningful, and people can feel that they can thrive in a workplace despite what is going on the outside. So success. It's not just all about the problems. People can be placed successfully, and they can be recruited well as a result of having particular strategic procedures that mitigate the impact of the biases that come about from talking about these different things. So Hannah, you just mentioned one person who faced microaggressions but now has been much better placed. Are there others that you can share with us?
Definitely. And a kind of tiny bit of a recipe for success before I kind of talk about individuals' stories. So we absolutely say with this work, which is behavioural, it's messy, it's hard, it's challenging, having a sponsor in place, super important, having operational capacity, super important, making sure everything's aligned strategically, very important, and piloting. Like we are kind of pilot nerds. Like we love, going in and trying something in an area and really learning and understanding from it, so you can kind of then go away and scale things. So we've had success with different employers. There's a couple of stories that kind of stay with me. So one was Itam. He's a guy from Yemen. He had worked out in the Middle East. He was a health and safety expert, and trying to come to the UK and find a job in health and safety, it was just like, no, mate. You don't have, you've not worked in the UK, your qualifications aren't from the UK, that's just never going to happen. And we put him in front of an employer, and the hiring manager had actually worked out in the Middle East, and he knew that 99.9% of the principles of health and safety in the Middle East were similar to that of the UK, and that bit that I talked about earlier, that targeted upskilling, could be taught. And he's absolutely flying and having a great career. So there's a great story. Natalia, more recently, so she came from Ukraine. She was a civil engineer, an estimator, and again struggled to find any opportunities, wasn't getting interviews. So our model is that we kind of put them straight forward in front of our partner employers. She was given an opportunity because she's great, and someone had, took out the time to actually talk to somebody and probe and have a conversation, which often, if people are screened out, doesn't happen. And she's doing fantastically well now. And so whereas a lot of other Ukrainians are facing homelessness because relationships with hosts are breaking down, or their language isn't sufficient that they can actually gain a job, which is a real horror on top of everything else. She's now renting her own flat near Canary Wharf and just doing fab. So, we have we've supported about 150 people since we got going in 2021. We've got a mentoring scheme with lots of mentoring pairs that we run that really help with kind of advocacy and awareness. So, onwards and upwards.
Thank you, Jess. I'm sure you have some success stories as well.
Yeah, we have plenty of success stories that we have shared. I really recommend anyone go to our website and watch our Walking to Work or any of our other campaigns, especially at the moment. I don't want to... I think it would be more valuable for you to see people's stories in their own voices, and also they're visually amazing. So I'll let you, our signpost you to our website to go have a look over there for people's individual stories. But I think in terms of kind of key successes to share more generally in terms of the recruitment stuff, we've spoken about it a bit, can speak about it all day. For us, it's really important to collect that data so that we recognize where certain areas or certain groups of people that we're not reaching, and then being able to be proactive with that. We get data feedback throughout our whole program as well, and we're very reactive to that feedback, ensuring that the program that we're creating and the recruitment is fit for purpose and for those that are coming through as well. And with that data being transparent in publishing it as well. So I think they're kind of, key successes in terms of our recruitment side of stuff. For individual stories, do go watch our videos. We'll be very happy if you do, and leave some comments and reactions on them as well.
Thank you both. Now, we'd love to hear if you've got any questions for me or for our panelists here, because this is a great opportunity to be able to hear a little bit more about these issues, and to speak in hopefully a safe space that you can do so. So if you do have any questions, thoughts, concerns, and would like to understand a little bit more about how to talk about race, religion, and ethnicity in the workplace, then happy to take those questions. Rebecca, we have one question. Shoot.
We have indeed, and the question follows on from the use of the acronym BAME, BAME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. And the point I think is made that when somebody's talking to an individual, they can check, I suppose, how that individual is being referred to, or they can ask them. When it's large swathes of, and I hope it's okay to say non-white, the example I'm using is on one of the big construction industry websites. It lists some statistics, and it says just 5.4% of construction workers are from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background. When, to Jess's point around data, when that data doesn't exist, so within construction built environment, to my knowledge, there's no data that breaks down through really anything other than just gender, male, white, and middle age. What language would you use? I know, Marcia, before you've spoken about the terminology racialized groups.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're talking generally within our sector, we've only got allegedly 15% women. How would you use what language would you use for the to answer the race ethnicity side of things?
Yeah, so I do subscribe to underrepresented racialized groups because I think it draws attention to the underrepresentation, the racialization, and the fact that we're grouping everyone together. And I think it's important for anyone reading these statistics to be cognizant of what it is that we're doing here and why it is that these this data needs to be gathered and what is the structural issue that we're trying to address. It draws, I think, by disaggregating the term, we can really start to recognize what it is that we're trying to tackle here, which is systemic racism. And so I would advocate for underrepresented racialized groups. Some people don't agree with the term non-white because they feel that it still centers whiteness. Again, you know, these things are subject to discussion. They're subject to debate. And I think the point being, to Marcus Ryder's point, and to the BAME Over campaign, which was an arts campaign asking people to stop using the term BAME. People who experience racism is what you're trying to draw attention to, and by drawing attention to it through the statistics, by using the term racialized in a very overt way, starts people thinking in a way that using the term BAME or even disaggregating Black, Asian and minority ethnic, when the term Black refers to a skin color, Asian refers to a continent, minority ethnic is a bit of a misnomer when actually you're referring to the global majority, starts to really get people to think about why it is we're collecting these statistics in the first place. We need to address underrepresentation, and point to what it is that we're trying to do here. That's my view. These things are still open to debate and discussion, and there is no one particular term, partly because it's a problematic issue in the first place, grouping together because of skin color, you know, ethnic background. So yeah.
Thank you. There is one question in, I'm conscious of the time, but this is also about language. Calling a white person white isn't considered offensive, but calling a Black person Black can be offensive. So this is a question around that use of language, but also applying that to religion. Is there a 3-minute answer that
there's less than 3-minute answer, really. It depends. You know, Black people actually for the most part don't mind being called Black. I think there's an issue with grouping people who are Black together and calling them Blacks. That is offensive. But you know, a lot of Black people are happy to self-identify as being Black, and that is to refer to anyone with historical recent African heritage. It is an acceptable term. But we should always disaggregate where we can: Black Caribbean, Black African, you know, depending on what we mean. And you know, I think it's very important to think carefully about what we're trying to say and adjust accordingly. White is not a racialized identity. It's more a standpoint, a power position that's rooted in structural power. And I think if you want to understand more about these things, there is plenty of reading available on these points. Of course, the key text on this is Reni Edo Lodge, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. We've got Emma Dabiri's very digestible What White People Can Do Next. And there's Angela Saini's Superior. We've got Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. There's How to Argue with a Racist by Adam Rutherford. There's White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. There's a massive, great, big, long reading list. If you want to understand more about how to navigate these terms, why they're difficult, the historic context, and also how they've been socialized, ideologized to be tricky, is rooted in this idea of maintaining a status quo. And so being able to pull apart the language is really, really important in order to tackle these systemic issues. I think I did that in 2 minutes.
Can I also just add that we're talking about this in terms of the language used within the UK as well. So you go to America, and obviously there are similarities in the terms, but people respond to they have different ethnic breakdowns as well that they feel more familiar with. So this is, from my understanding, within the UK context of how we're talking about this as well.
Absolutely.
Just bring that up.
Thank you. Thanks. Really, really good point. So I think that's it, unless we have any last second queries. I'm just going to quickly share my screen again to say that we have got a couple more of these to come. Later this month, we're talking about LGBTQIA. On the 12th of December, we're looking at generations and young people. And it just remains for me to say thank you very much indeed for joining us. If you'd like to get in touch with the panelists, their websites have been put in the chat.